Hello and welcome to Digital Careers, which offers insights and advice to advance your digital career, as well as make your digital hiring more effective. And today we're going to be talking about highly effective digital leaders. And my guest is Kate Thomas, who is a leadership effectiveness expert. And in particular, we'll be talking today about some of the leadership qualities needed for digital transformation. Now, Kate has 20 years of experience spanning people industries, and her leadership consulting experience started with Hay Group in Asia before the company was acquired by organization consulting firm Korn Ferry. Kate now runs her own leadership effectiveness business called Newland Rock, a sister company to Barton Rock, which she launched this year and specializes in three areas, which is assessment and succession, executive coaching, and finally, well-being. I hope you enjoy the show. Kate, thank you for joining us and welcome to Digital Careers.
Thank you, Guy. Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You're very welcome. So we're going to be talking today about highly effective digital leaders, and there's two parts to this conversation. The first of which is really about discussing what companies are increasingly looking for in their digital leaders, and then the challenges digital leaders are facing in companies, and what defines the most successful digital leaders from that leadership perspective. So before we kick off with all of that and get into the heart of the subject matter, a little bit about you, a bit about your background, and also the company that you've set up, Newland Rock, which we should emphasize as a sister company to Barton Rock, of course.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. So a bit about me. It feels uncomfortable to say that I am 20 years in a talent strategy space. Uncomfortable because, I'm realizing how long I've actually been working. But I started my career in talent, early days of being a recruiter and having a great alignment with what that whole recruitment cycle was all about. So how do we really identify the right person for the job? Real basic stuff, but thoroughly enjoyed it. And in the 20 years, it's expanded. And the last 10 years, nearly last 10 years, it's been focused in that management consulting side of things, partnering with large organizations to help them really identify how they get the best people into their business and how they develop them so that they are fitting everything that organization needs. So, talent strategy, leadership effectiveness has been a sweet spot for me for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. So the main themes of the Newland Rock business are?
We've got three main themes. So the core of what we're doing is focusing on leadership effectiveness. Mm-hmm. So really helping organizations identify and grow their leaders to be more effective. And we're doing that in three ways. So the first area that I focus on is on the assessment side of things. And that's really getting to a deeper level of how someone is doing what they're doing. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail, I think, given the context of today. And then we're moving into that stream where we're looking at, well, if you've got someone in place, how do you really develop them? How do you maximize what you have? And that for Newland Rock is through executive coaching. And the third part of the Newland Rock business is around sustainability. So the sustainability of a person being able to remain effective, and that leadership level, that's a hard gig. And, as a leader, we've got tremendous responsibilities thrown at us every day, especially now. And working with leaders so that they can sustain that effectiveness through well-being and in particular mental fitness.
Very good. Well, we will certainly dive into some of that, I'm sure, with the various areas that we're going to talk about today. But let's kick off with this point, really about something I've read on your website about you talking on the subject of differentiating businesses differentiating themselves based on their talent. And you said that the best product doesn't necessarily equate to the best result. So I think what you're saying there is that leadership really comes to the fore. So can you give us a little bit more color on your thoughts around that?
Yeah, of course. And this isn't just about leadership. This is quite a general comment about talent in an organization. And what I'm saying here is that it's not necessarily about what you're doing as a business. It's about how you're doing it, and the how comes from your people. So in terms of how they're actually going out, bringing that wealth of knowledge, and ensuring that what you do is seen as best in class and is received as best in class, that comes from people. So you can have the best product, it can be as slick as you like, but if the people in the organizations aren't behind it from a culture point of view, behind it in terms of demonstrating the right behaviors, it's not going to fly as well as it could. And so I'm not saying that it won't fly. I'm saying that there is a missed opportunity if your talent aren't really with you on the journey. And it's the talent that really will differentiate success.
So what you're saying there is it cuts across every industry and every function within a company potentially, and certainly isn't specific to digital, but it's something that could come to the fore in digital as much as anywhere else. How much
Absolutely.
do you,
And sorry, the additional part to that is that there's an ethical piece to that as well. There's a responsibility that an organization has to its people. And when organizations share that responsibility and show that responsibility, the discretionary effort that they get from their talent is huge. And again, that reaps the rewards and helps to differentiate.
yeah. So how much of an awareness do you think there is? I mean, this, to most people tuning in to this show, would probably say, well, it's a fairly obvious thing to say in some respects, and getting some of the basics right is often the hardest thing within companies. But how much awareness is there of this challenge, do you think, within companies that you talk to?
I think there is always the awareness is there and the intention is there. But as to whether there is alignment around when the talent conversation is brought up, and meaning, are our organizations moving forward with their strategic objectives, what it is that we want to achieve, and how we're going to do it from maybe a product perspective, and not necessarily bringing the talent conversation into that early enough. So yes, I think organizations are aware, but they would spend, in my experience, more effort and energy at a C-suite level talking about other things. And quite often the talent conversation becomes a latter thought, an afterthought, instead of it being one of the first thoughts and first set of actions.
Let's try and tie it into something a little more specific within the digital realm. And I know digital is just one of the industry sectors or functional areas that you've coached senior executives around, for example. But if you think around some of the senior digital execs that you have coached or assessed in the past, what are some of the headline leadership characteristics that they perhaps grapple with, in your view?
Grapple with in terms of what they're challenged by. When somebody is, and it depends really in terms of what that digital journey looks like in the organization that they're in. But typically, and quite broadly, when we're talking about digital, for every organization, there is a big element of change, that's going on. So when you're working with a leader who is in the hot seat, a big part of that for them was a few things. One is around from a coaching element, working on that control. So what I mean by that is when you're in a decision-making role as a digital leader, decision-making rights aren't always clear-cut. And this can be one of the biggest challenges in terms of how successful a business actually is in embedding a digital transformation, because there can be there isn't alignment. To come back to alignment again, there isn't alignment in terms of what it is that the company is trying to do. And so you've got this digital leader in the middle of this, they're in the hot seat of this, and they're driving all of this forward, but they don't actually have, in a lot of cases, the control to always push forward with their agenda. And even if they did have ultimate control, there is absolutely no point in a digital leader, or any leader, in fact, striving forward with their own agenda and not bringing the troops with them. So a lot of senior leaders, and in particular when they're in a digital decision-making role, the challenge that they're having from a coaching capacity is really helping them control that balance between wanting to get there in the speed that they want to get there, controlling themselves in terms of the appetite they have to make it happen and to make it happen fast, or as quick as possible, and then balancing the EQ side of things, to really make sure that they're bringing people with them on the journey, so that they get there all together, rather than the digital leader standing there on their own and a few allies standing next to them.
Yeah. And certainly in my work in the sort of senior digital exec search space, there isn't a day really that goes past, especially with companies older than 25 or 30 years, where we don't talk about the whole subject of digital transformation. It's on the agenda of every board of those organizations. And it's been compounded, I guess, even more through the last 12 months as companies have had to adapt and change so fast, right? And I guess this is something you've seen with leaders having to adapt to this new way of working as well, right?
Absolutely. And you talk about the digital agenda. It's really not a new thing. It's been a mega trend discussed for quite some time. But what has happened because of the pandemic is this huge acceleration. And for a lot of organizations, a bit of a shock, because yes, you're right. They've had it on the board. They've been having their conversations, but they might not always have got to this point of deciding how it is that they're going to move forward with that agenda. And now they're not only having to decide how they're going to move forward, they're actually having to do it in tandem all at the same time. So, you're looking at a real high level of agility that is being required, not just of the digital leader, but of the whole decision-making team. Quite a bit of a shift, actually, for some organizations, in terms of how they're operating and how they're making decisions.
And that term agility, we hear that a lot these days, agile leader, agile organization. We're going to talk about that more specifically in just a moment. Coming back to this whole COVID-induced working environment, we have this remote working environment where influencing over mediums like we're seeing each other on today, which is Zoom, and over the phone or whatever medium it might be, but not in person. How does that translate through into what's required of today's leader to be really effective then?
One of the first things I would say, first and foremost, is to be human. So I think that there has been a need for a lot of leaders to adjust their style, and show up as an individual and as a person and as a human, because we're in quite challenging times, and working virtually to build that relationship, you don't get the chit chat that you would normally have maybe in the lift, or sitting down having a little bit of a coffee beforehand to get to know each other. In some respects, you turn on the camera and then it's sort of meeting started. Okay, crack on. And it's dialing that back a bit and realizing that you still need to have that human interaction. And if you're the leader driving certain meetings, you need to make sure that you're given the space for everybody to actually unwind a bit and feel like as if they can bring themselves to that discussion. And in fact, what I'm noticing, and you may have noticed this as well, is that there seems to be a shift in terms of how LinkedIn is showing up. Definitely in the last few months, I'm calling it the lockdown LinkedIn, because it is a far more informal. We're showing more photographs of our lives. There's plenty of people putting images up of their families and saying, hey, this is my office and here's the toddler sat at my desk. So I think by showing more of that human, this is who I am, and then bringing that characteristic or bringing that way of communicating to to the technology of what you're using to have your meetings, etc., is really what's making people feel comfortable. Because I think the key is to feel comfortable and be yourself.
Yeah, and you're right. That point about, the Zoom camera comes on and off you go. It's like the starting gun going on a 100-meter sprint. And I've heard that feedback from senior candidates that have interviewed over video conference, and there isn't any icebreakers. There's no real kind of small talk to make both parties feel at ease. And actually, from a performance perspective in an interview, you're not going to see the real person if they're feeling a bit uptight and you've gone straight into the interview. So I absolutely agree. So I think what you're saying there is that kind of that humane aspect to show the kind of the real you, the authentic you. And some of the things I hear from experts like yourself, or even when I've tried to apply this in leading myself, is show a level of accessibility and humility and down to earthness, if that's the right phrase, with the people that you're working with. And that still holds true in a virtual sense as much as it does in a real life sense.
I agree. Just emphasize more in a virtual sense, because we really, as human beings, we are wired to need human contact. And so we can't have that in a physical sense at the moment. So making sure that when we are having the opportunity to have a conversation with someone virtually, that we're feeling that we can actually.
Yeah. Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit more about this term agile, because we're hearing it a lot in today's digital world. What does agile mean, both in a cultural organization wide sense? And then secondly, let's talk about it in an individual leadership sense. Do you want to just give us some thoughts on that?
I would, but I'm going to, if I can, flip it and do it the other way.
Sure, absolutely.
So let's go with the person first. And you're right, this, being agile, it seems quite hot at the moment. It's sort of the in buzzword of what's required, not just in digital, what's required in leadership. And but it isn't new. It's probably on steroids at the moment because of what's going on in our world. And the way I like to look at being agile is to put sort of two pillars to it. And it's around how you're thinking and then what it is that you're doing. So when we're thinking about it from a thinking place, somebody who has an agile way of working, they're curious, they're inquisitive, they're exploring everything around them. They're asking a lot of questions, so they really are somebody who is going to explore the possibilities and really try and in that think about, well, if we haven't done it before, that's fine. Why haven't we? And what is it that we actually could do? So they're future focused and they are energized to break down boundaries and to instill something different. So, the thinking that comes into those characteristics. And then you've got, well, what you see them doing. So what are the actual, how do they get it done? And what are the things that you'll see them doing? And first part I notice when somebody is coming from an agile mindset is that it's not about them actually. They might be the drivers of the thinking, but then when it actually comes to putting things into action, they are the leader that is going to think broadly about who else needs to be involved, who can add a perspective here. So they want to go as broad as possible to make sure that they are exploring everything that there is to explore. And there's a level of, and this is probably a differentiating factor for people who are in that agile category. It's about having a level of empathy on how you're doing it. Because what can actually happen, and this links then to maybe that cultural point, what can actually happen is that you have an agile leader who is full throttle, throwing out all the ideas, delighted with themselves for actually doing it, and the business being very happy that they look like they are moving forward. So, we're going in the right direction. But if there isn't that level of empathy in terms of how they're doing it, to make sure that they're bringing people on the bus with them, they can be agile in their thinking as much as they want. They need to be agile also in how they are managing people and how they are leading the business through their people.
Yeah.
So I think that's characteristics. You've got people who are valuing differences, who will ask for different perspectives. And if you even look at their allies at work or their network, it would be quite diverse. So you're not looking at somebody who's particularly focused on a niche area. They get their information from all different types, all walks of life, in its true form, if we're really looking at it in its true form.
So in the context of that example that you gave earlier about digital transformation, I mean, that's probably a good example of where some of those qualities that you talked about would be highly desirable.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about digital transformation, you're talking about change, but you're not just talking about change. Change brings new, but the fact that the digital aspect of it is new in itself, you've kind of got a bit of a double whammy. So you've got, change on change, and therefore thinking about how does a business really embed that, and who are the people in their business, or who do they need to hire to help them drive that forward. This whole, the characteristics behind being agile become really important.
Okay, yeah, and I've seen that in so many examples that I've been asked to help on in terms of hiring senior leaders for digital change programs, is that ability to bring people on the journey from lots of different functions. It's almost got to be a top-down led transformation where it's got the CEO or the board's sponsorship and support, but then it's really about, it's a bit of a sell job internally to bring people on that journey. That influencing becomes ultra critical.
Becomes extremely critical, but it's the how they're influencing, because there's so many different ways to influence. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of this level of emotional intelligence and this empathy that comes with how they're influencing. Because if you think about digital transformation, and like I just mentioned, it's about change. As human beings, we typically don't like change. Some of us do, actually. We get energy from it and we think, oh, let's give that a go. But there is a bit of an internal chitter-chatter that goes on, that when we're dealing with change, we're thinking that we've done something wrong. So if a leader is going to bring people with them on the journey, they've also got to deal with the fact that there are going to be a large population behind them that are not at their comfort level with the fact that they are changing. And that actually goes as far as not just different levels and therefore lower levels in the business. That's also when it comes to a senior leadership team. If you think about the head of digital transformation, maybe versus another functional area, there will be a different comfort with actually having change within that business. And that's often then when you get a bit of a tricky spot. And to your earlier question, how do you maybe help someone develop if they're in these types of roles? Stakeholder management and bringing people with you at a senior level is when it can get very stressful and can lead to a bit of burnout.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the careers, the recruitment, the hiring piece. Let's say you're assessing a senior digital executive, and the feedback you give, having interpreted the psychometrics, for example, or done a behavioral science assessment with the candidate, the feedback is they're not demonstrating enough agility, or the agile skills they have aren't up to what's required in that job. That candidate walking away from that feedback, how can they work on that development point? What advice would you have for them, whether it's agile skills or any other for that matter? What is the foundation for going away and really developing those leadership effectiveness attributes?
Thinking how I might answer that, and the first thing that came into my mind was slightly controversial, but what I'm going to say first and foremost is being very clear in terms of, as a candidate, why it is that you actually want to be in this particular role. And sometimes the energy that you might get as a person, because the role gives a lot of responsibility, it will can therefore attract the wrong type of person. So it becomes more about I have a level of authority and influence here to be able to do lots of things, and I'm attracted to that, and therefore I want to do it, versus I actually have the capability and the characteristics to do it. And that actually is where a lot of organizations spend a lot of time trying to differentiate the type of talent that they have in their organizations, because it's not necessarily the people that put their hand up to say, I really want that job because that sounds awesome, I'm really interested in challenge and obstacles, doesn't necessarily mean that they have the characteristics to do it well. So back to your question, if somebody comes to me and says, I really wanted this job, but the feedback was that, I didn't necessarily demonstrate the agility traits, I would be looking at, actually, why is it that they actually want to be in this type of role in the first place? And are they being motivated by the wrong things?
Yeah.
That would be the first step. And then moving on to that, in terms of kind of getting into a little bit more detail, there are, from a mental fitness perspective, things that go on in our brains that make us feel as though we are having to operate from survival mode versus more big blue sky thinking, right? And when we're in this sort of survival mode, what tends to happen is that we are blocking our ability to be agile. So we are more focused, more task orientated, thinking about the now, thinking about the immediate goal, and feeling quite pressurized about that. Whereas if we rewire our brain and actually remove this level of pressure and stress that we're placing on us, we can and do actually come from an agile mindset more naturally. But now we're going into, more of the neuroscience of coaching, and I might start to lose your audience, but
well, exactly.
it is a fascinating part to be able to see.
And this whole subject of stress, it's almost a podcast in itself, how to manage it, how to deal with it. But going back to that point about feedback on leadership attributes and qualities, one of the things I'm hearing in there is that you've got to kind of have an awareness of who you are and where you're effective. Is that one of the points that you're saying? And that, you get to a certain point in life where you can't wholly rewire yourself to be a different type of person, notwithstanding some of the points you made about coping mechanisms and stress management and so forth. They're slightly different scenarios, but what you're saying is if the feedback you're getting is you're not suited to roles that have a heavy degree of focus on change, for example, then you've really got to channel your efforts to roles that leverage your leadership strengths more effectively. Is that something that you're feeding back?
Yeah, I am feeding back, but I think there's another layer to what you're talking about, and this comes down to because what I don't want to say is that, if a leader doesn't demonstrate all the characteristics behind being an agile person, an agile leader, then they fail in a digital world, because all of our working environments will be functioning in that digital capacity, if it not already is, right? So that's not the point. But what I think is maybe helpful for somebody who is applying for these types of roles and not necessarily getting the ones that they want is also to think about, where is that organization that they're wanting to work for at in their digital transformation? Because there are, and you've talked about this before, around there being different scales of the journey, and therefore different requirements at those different scales. So somebody who might be coming into a company that is quite mature on their digital journey, and is looking to really take it to its next level of maturity, isn't maybe necessarily the same type of person that is coming into an organization who is in maybe the hamster wheel, the sort of, we haven't been doing enough, we need to get going, and we need to do it really, really fast. And so, that digital leader, or that transformation leader for that company going through all the change, needs to be wired differently, or will need to show up differently than somebody who's going into an organization who's more mature. So I think it's also around being clear when somebody is applying for a role, or for that candidate to be clear on, where do I actually fit here? Where do I add the most value, and being clear that they're talking about the value they can add, and not really about, oh, that just sounds really, really juicy, I want to give that a go.
Yeah. Okay. All clear. Excellent. So let's assume we're moving forward with a candidate. How do you advise companies to really effectively assess for some of these leadership attributes that we've been talking about today? What are some of the techniques available to companies out there?
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot of choice. But actually, there's probably not as much choice as you might think there is at critical levels. And I would say that when we're looking at somebody that is going to be driving a digital agenda, is leading a digital transformation, or is a leader of any sort, that they are driving, important strategic activities, then no, there probably isn't as much choice as organizations might think. And so it starts off with this whole piece around, what is it? Where are you at as an organization? And that's an obvious question to ask, but it will drive the nuances in terms of what it is that you are looking for out of the person that's going to take on the role. Every company is different. Every role is different, but there will always be a core element of what is required at a certain level of leadership, and then a bit of a top and tail around what are the nuances to where that organization is at. So once you've had that sort of qualification, you're having that conversation to identify what's going on, then it's a case of actually creating an interview. I'm going to use protocol, but an actual interview style that's going to really draw out who this person is. And, that isn't specific questions, give me an example when. That for a senior leader is something that most people can prepare quite well for. And when they have been at a certain level of their career, will have some really good examples to be able to demonstrate. You don't really get at that point a level of color that really helps you understand who that person is, to the point that if I was a fly on a wall, I would be able to see you in action and really watch what it is that you do and why it is that you do it, because I'm this fly on the wall that's got superpowers and I can read your mind as well. And that's the level of interviewing that I propose to my clients when they are hiring at this critical level. It's a behavioral science-based assessment. They run for a few hours, and you are getting the evidence to really validate that the person that you're hiring can do the job, and they have demonstrated the characteristics in how they've done it previously. So, you've got quite a lot of confidence then. You've got confidence of what you're buying. Doesn't mean to say that what you're buying, and I mean this politely in terms of talent, you're buying in new talent. It doesn't mean that that person is perfect, but you know what you're getting, and you also very clearly know what it is that you're not getting, so that there is a development next step in terms of being able to help them close the dial. And if it's not there, how critical is it to what it is that we started with, meaning what it is that you said you needed? And if that gap isn't something that sits in that critical component, then it's worthwhile going for and hiring that person and helping them close those gaps when they're in the role.
Yeah. And that sounds, if it's a couple of hours, that sounds like a fairly exhausting process for both parties involved in one of those behavioral science assessments.
It's funny, actually, because when you might mention to someone, or, the diary entry goes in, and, some of these assessments are longer than a couple of hours, they can go up to about 3.5. They can feel tiring, but do you know what the feedback tells me from those leaders that I work with like this? They actually don't find it as tiring as that they think they're going to find it. They find it very exhilarating because they go through a thinking process about themselves in a way that they haven't in such a long time. They're there's a bit of luxury to being able to spend 3 hours talking about yourself. Find any leader that says they have that time. So when they do have the time, and in this type of interview, you are peeling back the onion a lot to really get to that core level of who that person is. Those in working with me in this find it incredibly rewarding, and a lot of people have actually said this has been quite transformational for me. I've learned a lot about myself, and I've forgotten a lot about myself as well.
Yeah. Just hearing you talk there, it reminds me of almost like a bit of a combination of you asking the probing questions, but almost an executive coaching exercise that they naturally take themselves through. Is that a fair comment, do you think?
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it, actually, because you like to think that when you're at a certain level of your game, you've got a level of self-awareness that you can start to kind of put the picture together. So as they're going through these sessions, there are aha moments where they think about, oh wow, I've now really made this connection about why I did that, why I made that move, what was going on for me at that stage of my life, and how it actually might be impacting where they're at now as well.
One of the things I think, particularly smaller companies perhaps, but I'm not suggesting for a moment it's exclusively the domain of smaller businesses, but lots of people would accept that they hire on gut feel. And I guess that's something that companies need to be aware of, and they need to understand the risks of taking that approach. What counsel have you got for businesses that go, you know what, Kate, that's all very well, but we don't have the time to do 3.5 hour interviews. We don't have the budget to run them. We've been doing this a long time. I've been hiring people for 20, 30 years, and I know what I'm looking for. What counter argument is there to that?
Well, just to mention that it doesn't always have to be up to 3.5 hours.
Sure.
So this is quite a nimble process, and we do adjust them to make sure that it's not going to be too heavy for a client. But going back to the gut feel, gut feel is such a powerful thing for an individual, right? Because it's that intuition, it's the message that you're receiving from your awareness and what you know. And that's not to say that that isn't valid and important, but what happens in an organization is this level of gut feel is subjective. So your gut feel and my gut feel about somebody, and then maybe add a couple of others who are interviewing in the process as well, it sort of becomes a bit wishy-washy. And so when you're looking at gut feel, it will give you is a bit of insight into whether that person will fit. Do they fit how we roll here? Are they our type of person? Versus actually what it is that, how do they work, and is that going to actually be what we need? There isn't evidence on gut feel, and a CV is definitely not evidence on what someone can do. So you do need to peel back the layers to really understand the person in further and more, to be able to take yourself from what I'd say is a reference point and an important to have versus something that is essential, to really validate what it is that you're doing with senior people in your organization.
Yeah, and then I guess all of this stuff flows into the cultural fit in inverted commas piece, doesn't it? So
that's right.
That then ties into core values matching and then the whole cultural fit. So understood.
But there can be, and there have been times that I have been involved in the assessment of a few different options, and you can end up with some excellent options on the table, and then you have to make a decision on which one you're going with. I would say to the client who works on gut feel, that's when gut feel kicks in. If you've got a bit of a like for like going on, you've got the evidence telling you that you've got two individuals that can really do this job, then your gut feel is what drives you to that next stage of decision making. Gut feel shouldn't be the first thing that helps you make that decision.
Yeah, well, that's good feedback for me, because I come into contact with a lot of clients that probably don't use a lot of assessment tools or techniques beyond straightforward interviews, and a lot of them do accept they make decisions based on gut feel. So I'll throw some of these points into the mix next time I'm talking to them. Now we're going to finish on a final question, which is just a bit of fun more than anything else. We're going to talk about leadership material and books that you've read and thought leaders out there in the world. The world of leadership and information on leadership is absolutely vast, isn't it? And you can get lost in the sheer number of different high quality people out there, and I'm sure some lesser quality books as well. But what are the individuals that you follow and that you're passionate about and that you quote quite often when you talk to some of your coachees in your work, for example?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I feel like I'm on desert island discs, and what would I take with me? And to be honest, I'm somebody who actually likes to consider multiple perspectives. So I wouldn't actually say I am a follower of any one thought leader and guru, because for me that means that I'm missing out on others that might have something quite interesting to say. I'm always drawn to Simon Sinek, for example. He talks with such passion, and in his early days, The Power of Why, I think for a lot of people was a bit of an aha moment. And there's a lot of smaller companies who could use that methodology and really get a huge amount of benefit. I'm also somebody from just from a personal perspective. I do quite a bit of reading around energy, and what I mean by that is internal energy. Where is your energy, and how do you manage your energy? And the reason I do that is linked to that wellness, well-being aspect of leadership effectiveness. So I do actually connect with quite a few, I would say, out of the box thinkers when it comes to managing your internal energy and recognizing where it is and what damage it might be, damage and good it might be doing. But I can't say that I hang my hat on anybody. And I've also worked with fantastic thought leaders in the companies that I've been part of, who have really shaped my thinking when it comes to leadership effectiveness. In particular, my time with Hay Group and the work that they used to do on motives and values, that was extremely transformational. And I saw that in action with a lot of leaders that I worked with as well. Yeah. So I'm not answering your question in exactly the way that it was placed, but I'm giving you maybe a bit of a color of how broad my bookshelf might look in comparison to maybe others that are in the same space as myself.
Well, and I think it's also to be receptive and open to thought leaders from a variety of different spaces. So to give yourself a rounded sort of leadership quality. But we're going to have to
say I'm agile, therefore.
Yeah,
right?
Well, absolutely. It's been a theme running through today's conversation, but we are unfortunately out of time, and very much enjoyed chatting to you today. A lot of ground covered, and some of this obviously is very specific to digital. We've talked quite a bit about how important digital transformation is to so many companies, and compounded by everything that's been happening around us, the pace of change, and some of that awareness that's required from leaders of the different qualities that organizations are looking for. But also that point you make about stage of maturity. It's a horse for course type of scenario where leaders need to be aware of what they bring to the equation and what's the right organization for them at whatever stage of maturity that business might be at. So some really interesting insights, and then leading on to that whole piece around the behavioral science assessment I found fascinating. So thank you very much for your contribution, and the best of luck with Newland Rock for this year and beyond.
Thank you. Good to join you and good to chat.
So I hope you found that interesting. The fascinating thing about leadership is you never really stop developing, and no more so than in the fast moving and constantly changing world of digital. Now, if you'd like to read more about Kate's thoughts on the various aspects of leadership effectiveness, she has a journal section to her website, newlandrock.com, and can be contacted at kate@newlandrock.com. And if you like what you hear on Digital Careers, please leave a 5-star rating. And if you need advice on your digital career or would like help with your digital hiring, please do get in touch with me at guy@bartonrock.com or visit my website, bartonrock.com.